أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum. Walaikum salam. My dear respected brothers and my dear respected sisters and all the youngsters upstairs, I welcome you to another event. And this particular event is quite an interesting one that actually interests me as well. The brother who is right next to me is brother Abdul Malik Taylor. He was a revert in Islamic faith. Is the Britain's first professionally qualified Muslim tour guide, who is the founder of Halal Tourism Britain. He has commissioned the conduct of an Islamic tour of Tate Britain, attracting record-breaking numbers, and including the Mayor of London. He has taken part in the Jorvik Viking Festival, which is one of the largest festivals of Viking in the world, as Ibn Fadl, and someone who has interacted with the Vikings. He's also an international speaker specializing in the Muslim history of Britain, and is regularly featured in a lot of media, such as the Al Jazeera, BBC Islam Channel, TV Al Hijra, Jazeera TV, Arab News, and the Middle East to name quite a few. So a very respected brother. Thank you very much for joining us, brother. Before we start, I would like to advise you of the structure of today. The structure of today is obviously we'll have the brother speak about the history of Britain and the Muslims, how they came about in here. But after that, we'll have some refreshments upstairs. So feel free to stay behind. There is some exhibition which you can have a look at, some articles and some of the history which you can observe. As well as that, obviously the sisters will be there to assist you. But please do stay behind for that. We're not expecting any fire alarms, so if you hear one, it is a real one. Okay, so make sure to either meet yourself at the back, at the front of the masjid, or at the back. One of the volunteers will be happy to help you. Okay, so I'll pass you over to our respected brother. And now something that obviously we all want to learn about. So Jazakallah khair, and there will be questions, so hold those questions, and we'll be getting questions on YouTube as well. Just one small thing to point out. On YouTube and on the screen upstairs and downstairs, if you're watching, the screen will go dark during the presentation, because obviously to make the presentation visible, and afterwards we'll make that bright again. Jazakallah khair, and to the brother.
Switched on. Technical issues. Alhamdulillah bin alameen wa sallallahu ala rasul Kareem. All praise is due to Allah, may His peace and blessings be upon His last and final messenger, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. My name is Abdul Malik Taylor, as the brother has introduced me as. I am a revert to Islam, or convert to Islam. I used to be a practicing Hindu. It's a bit about my background actually. That's me when I was about 13 years old. I always like to show a children image because you can kind of relate to the children who may be in the audience as well. I was 18 years old when I became Muslim, and what was quite strange was that, so in terms of the presentation, I actually stand up and give presentations. I find it's a lot more freer as opposed to me just sitting down, so you might have to turn your heads a bit as well, but it keeps you awake as well. But I was 18 years old when I became Muslim. And I used to be a practicing Hindu. I did pilgrimage to India as well, met a man god, etc. But I'm not here to speak about my journey to Islam. That's a whole separate talk in itself. If you've got any questions off that, because I know most of the time it does actually appear when I do guided tours and bus trips, etc. I would prefer to, if you don't mind, to answer questions with regards to history of Islam and Muslims in Britain. If there's no questions of that, then I'm happy to take those questions if you don't mind. But I was 18 years old and I took my Shahada. I was born in Hackney, then it was Walthamstow where I took my Shahada. And I met all the Muslims, many Muslims I came across. They didn't know nothing about their own history in Britain. How many of you know your history in Britain? Put your hand up, apart from this masjid, and maybe Woking Mosque. Anyone here knows some history about Islam or Muslims in Britain? There we are. How many of you know about history in Al-Andalus? A few of you. Yeah? Why is that? Huh? How many of you know about Ottoman history? There are a lot more hands going up, especially with the youth at the back over there. They think they're going to be the next Ertugrul, something like that. But, this is quite strange when you think about it. This is how I felt when I embraced Islam. It didn't make sense. I met the Muslims. Every time I asked them, do you know anything about your Muslim heritage in Britain? It was like, no. And I took a step back, I did. And I'm thinking to myself, why is this the case that the Muslims don't know this? And that was when I started my journey looking into Muslim heritage of Britain. And since then I became Britain's first professionally qualified Muslim tour guide as well. So I made history. And there was another revert brother who I inspired. And there was a third revert brother who was in training as well, but he died halfway through. And he was actually a former priest as well. So I am the founder of Halal Tourism Britain, Muslim History Tours. I have over 40 tours now. I am writing a children's book about this topic as well. So I'm not going to come from academia. I'm coming from a children's point of view, if you like, writing a book about Muslim history in Britain for children. So it'll be more disseminated into libraries and schools. So inshallah, the whole idea, it'll be a lot more productive from that side. Well, think about the following now. Much of the Quran, if we're to read it and learn from it, is related to history for us to learn, so we don't fall into the same mistakes as the people before us. But just ponder about that. How many of us would actually do that if we're living in this country? Some of us are born here, some of our children who are born here, some of us may be on third or fourth generation as well. Many people, including Muslims who are young and old, simply don't know how much rich Muslim history there is here. If I was to ask you, when do you think the earliest Muslim connection to Britain was? What century would you say? Or what year? Let's make it easier. Just shout it out. 1700s? Yeah? How about the youth at the back? 1400s? Well, the youth are more closer than the adults. But yet they're wrong still as well. I'm going to tell you the earliest one. When we learn about our history, it kind of strengthens us. It's part of our heritage. And when you come across the far right people, or even the educational establishment, I went through the British education system as well. I know at that time how much there wasn't in terms of Muslim heritage, or even Asian history. But knowing about that, we can actually strengthen ourselves, and we can actually relate to perhaps the people who came before us as well. But it also challenges Islamophobia in this country as well, and it kind of empowers us as well to speak more confidently. A lot of suggestions is that we're a community that came after the Second World War. As you're going to see today, that's not the case. It challenges, you have an opportunity to challenge the media as well. And in my experience, because I have that knowledge, when the media interview me and they say incorrect things, which I am going to mention as we go along, I have that authority above them where I can challenge them. Raising awareness about Muslims and Islam in Britain is a form of dawah. What I say to people who are organising open days at Masjid, have you got a part that relates to your heritage of the organisation, the building? The norm is no. And I'm going, well, why not? This is something when I give presentations to non-Muslims, that they say each mosque open day is identical to another mosque open day. And the way that it will make it a difference is if they have a part that explains their history. So that's the way to rope them into the masjid. So, the earliest Muslim connection to Britain, believe it or not, goes back to an English king in the year 773. That's how early it was. And that's only 141 years after the death of Prophet Muhammad. And this would have been at which time? The Tabi'in, even. So imagine that, how early the earliest Muslim connection is. Have any of you heard of this before? You know how this is the earliest Muslim connection? Is to do with this object here. Opherex had the biggest kingdom in Britain, or England at that time. You can see it, Mercia. The biggest kingdom here. So the other kings here, they would have looked up to him as well. He set up defenses against the Vikings. Most people heard of the Vikings though, but not the king who was actually trying to fight them, keep them away from England. And he created a coin that had, what's this here? The Shahada. So imagine we had an English king who had the Shahada, a foundation of our faith. Something that I would have said and any other convert. Are there any converts, reverts in this room? What's your background, if you don't mind me asking? Irish. I have a separate presentation for that. But there are obviously some overlaps as well. So we have the Shahada here, an English king creating a imitation of the gold dinar, the Islamic gold dinar. Now some people probably wonder, was he a secret Muslim? That's the line the Muslims like. The reality of the matter is that he created this coin because it was the currency of the trade at that time around the Mediterranean. You know that largely today when we trade, largely, not exclusively anymore, it's the dollar. That's the currency of trade. Back then, around the Mediterranean, it was the gold dinar. So that shows you how much power and wealth the Muslims had at that time. So he's creating that coin as a replica. This coin for the next 1,000 years goes to the Vatican as a form of tax to the Pope. Back in the 1800s, the coin emerges in Rome, where it's actually auctioned off. Then somebody from France bids for it, who wins for it, and then he keeps it for a few years, and then he auctions it off. He makes his way to London at Sotheby's in 1913, and they auction it off, and guess which museum acquired it? Not the History Museum, the one that came before that. It was the British Museum. They acquired it. It is on display. However, it is not in the Islamic gallery. Now that's quite odd when you think about it. The earliest Muslim connection is not actually featured in the Islamic gallery, the Al-Bukhari Foundation gallery, or they call it the Islamic World Gallery. It's quite odd, isn't it? It's a disconnect here when you think about it. There's no sign pointing, directing people to say the earliest Muslim connection in Britain is in the coin gallery. Unless you knew it was there, like you had a tour guide with you, like having me there take you there, you wouldn't know about it. Many Muslims that I've seen who go there, they have no knowledge about this. I see Muslim school teachers bringing Muslim school children there. And school children, part of the national curriculum, they have to learn about Anglo-Saxons. So I would ask them, so do you know the Muslim connections to Anglo-Saxons when I meet them there? And they say no. I go, did you know the earliest Muslim connection is an Anglo-Saxon connection and it's in this museum? And they're like, we didn't know that. Sometimes people may want to go booking certain speakers at museums and workshops, etc., but that doesn't necessarily tell you everything. And sometimes you need to have that Muslim person there to tell you the other side. So this is the journey about the imitation of the gold dinar that an English king had, only 141 years after the death of Prophet Muhammad. So just imagine that. Now, we heard about the Vikings, and we know Ophorex actually had some battles with the Vikings to actually create some defenses to warn them across. Largely when I went to school, I was taught that the Vikings came from Scandinavia, and they went here to England. York is over here. That's why I took part in an event there, the biggest one, as Ibn Fadlan. And they went to Dublin, and they went to Iceland, they went to Greenland, and on to what's called America. Well, the Native Americans don't call it America. But we were never taught how the Vikings had interacted with the Muslims in Al-Andalus. How many of you knew that the Vikings had battles with the Muslims? One person. They took over Seville, which was once being ruled by the Muslims. And they had it captured for a number of days until the Muslims regrouped and repelled them. But they also went to, any Moroccans here? No Moroccans, but they went to Morocco as well. They did go to the Hagia Sophia place in Turkey now as well. Hagia Sophia Masjid, they went to Turkey. If you go to Turkey, in the Hagia Sophia Masjid, there is Viking writing in there as well, which you probably think is just some scribbly lines. Again, most people go there, the Muslims, they don't know about that interaction with the Vikings as well. But the Vikings, if they went eastwards through Russia, they would be called the Rus. What's the Urdu word for Russians? Rus as well. So now you know where the word the Rus comes from the Vikings. If they came to the European side over here, they were known as the Mujush, or Mushriks. They were fire worshippers. And when you look at some of the experiences of the Vikings and how they're described by the Muslims, had it not been for the Muslims interacting with the Vikings, you would not have actually known more about the Vikings than in non-Muslim discourses and writings. There's much more written about the Vikings within the Muslims' books than non-Muslim books. I don't like to use Western discourse, Western books. Why? Because the Muslims ruled a part of Europe as well. That was the West as well. Sometimes I get interviewed by the media. They use this typical line, isn't it so wonderful that when Europe was living in the Dark Ages, the Muslim world flourished? Have you heard this? Yeah? How many of you believe you live in a Muslim world? How many of you use the expression the Muslim world? Just put your hand up, that's fine. Nobody uses it, a few people do. Okay. Where is the Muslim world? Which galaxy do you find it on? Which other faith has do they have a Christian world? A Hindu world? A Jewish world? No. It's only for the Muslims, if you realize this, that they have this Muslim world. And who coined it? Who created this term? It was the Crusaders, not the Muslims. So people talk about decolonization of language, which is about 200-300 years, you could say, maybe 400. But I talk about decrusading of language. Language is highly important. Muslim world, the term was not created by the Muslims, but it's the Muslims themselves who use it extensively. And you think about it, it's a sense of othering us. Crusaders did a good job with that, didn't they? Now it's time for us to reclaim our true identity and to use our own terms as well. There are other terms, and it may feel a bit uncomfortable with hearing this as well, but there are other terms that we use that didn't come from us. And you'll be surprised and shocked how embedded it is within the Muslim communities. So that's a bit about the Vikings. We also find Islamic coins being discovered around Britain in various places. And people obviously wonder, how are the Islamic coins being discovered that even date back to around about the 800s and 900s or so? And people seem to forget that when the Vikings were interacting with the Muslims, it wasn't just battles, they were also trading. They would actually take fur to the Muslim countries, and in exchange they would do it, taking back silk, etc. And sometimes they're doing a buying and selling. So the Vikings, if you think about it, if they were part of England as well, and they used to rule parts of England, obviously they're bringing Islamic coins back then, isn't it? And in that way, some coins would have been buried. And that's how we find around some northern European countries, including England, where we're discovering different Islamic coins as well. So, Al-Andalus. Most of you have probably heard of this. If you remember the shop, some of the elders may remember the shop, 7-Eleven. I always say, remember that shop, because that's the easiest way to remember this year. When the Muslims, by Tariq ibn Zayd, Gibraltar, the crossover from Gibraltar into Spain. They crossed from Morocco into a place called Gibraltar. Gibraltar is a British colony, and Britain won't give it up for strategic reasons. Where it's located, it's the opening of the Mediterranean Sea. And what you find is Gibraltar actually means Jabal Tariq, the mountain of Tariq. Who was Tariq? Tariq was the commander who took the Muslims across. And what you find is that when they went northwards, they went all the way into France, they went into Switzerland as well. Did you know Muslims used to rule by Islamic law in Switzerland? Islam had reached Switzerland before Islam had got to the Balkans as well. They went up to a place called Pontes. In Arabic, because the Battle of the Shuhada it was. And they're trying to build a masjid there. And it's been a bit back and forth in terms of the local authorities, etc. But when the Muslims used to rule this part of Europe, this was the place that one would go to for knowledge, for ilm. It wasn't only the Muslims who'd go there. It was the Christians, the Jews, etc., who'd flocked to different parts of Al-Andalus. And what you find is, hold on, there is this clip I'm going to play here, and then I can come back to the clip. Inshallah, it should play. So let's see what happens. Bismillah. Okay, it's not. Nope. Okay, it's not going to play. Okay, it's Wi-Fi connected as well, but it's not playing. Okay, let me just go on to here. Types of knowledge, what people were concerned with about going there. There was, for example, Paul Averroes in the 9th century. He said the Christians were studying more Arabic than Latin, that they were frightened that they may convert to Islam just based upon knowledge and learning the language. Imagine that. There were people who were going to Toledo as well, and looking at, Paris first, and they were seeing what the people there were studying. They were studying art and architecture, and they were commentating, saying, is this knowledge? Then they went to Toledo, which was being ruled by the Muslims at that time, and they said, this is the place where you go for knowledge. So it was highly recognizable that the Muslims had that knowledge there, and that's where you had to go. You had even King Henry II's tutor who traveled to Syria, Sicily, Palestine, and he bought books from Spain as well. And, he deposited into libraries over here where they were being used as well. Transfer of knowledge from the Muslim countries to the non-Muslim countries. Many different ways in terms of how our knowledge flourished in non-Muslim countries. There's also from Scotland as well, Michael of Fife, who translated a number of works with regards to Ibn Rushd as well. Something I'd just like to make mention here is that, in Qurtuba, there were 17 public libraries when the Muslims used to rule there. At that time in England, libraries were seen for the elite only, or different parts of Europe as well, only for the elite people. Imagine that. Public knowledge, elite knowledge. See the difference in the knowledge of the power of the knowledge here. One, you're disseminating to large masses of people, but then in other European countries, it said no, it's only for us lot, very few people. Who's this guy? Thank you. Heard of him, half-hatted one. What's he most famously known for? Killing his wife. How many wives did he chop off? There's a bit of dispute there, yeah? Are your wife's upstairs or something? You want to be diplomatic with your answer? Henry VIII, what were some of his connections? People don't know that he had Muslim connections. He had Muslims who used to work for him as well. He had a Turkish bath. Imagine that. It was only discovered in the early 1900s. If you know central London where Whitehall is, you have the Ministry of Defence building. That's the site where they discovered he had a Turkish bath. So imagine that. How he used to dress as well. He's got the Turkish knot here, the double knot. He's also got the Ushek rug over here, which is known as a star design rug. And look at that. He had over 400 Turkish rugs. And Uşak is a place that is still in Turkey, and it still manufactures rugs as well. This is one of the listings it was, saying one carpet of Turkey making wrought with fine coral, the grounded being riddle and a border, the ground with black fringed. So imagine that, that's how descriptive his inventory was, to say categorically that he had Turkish rugs. Before then, did rugs used to exist, carpet used to exist in England? No. So that's something where you see the culture or customs of England even changing now, where they are adopting some form of carpet. You have got this, Okay, here we are. Don't know how I skipped so many slides. This person here, which is that person there, he is a black individual that has a turban on it, and he's somebody who was a trumpeter for King Henry VIII. And it has been suggested that he was a Muslim as well, or what was called a blackamoor. And that was somebody who came from North Africa. Sometimes people say it also was from Muslim Spain. And what you find is, like, we don't really know his original name, but they call him John Black. If it was Yahya something, I don't know yet. But it was known that he came from North Africa, and because of the turban, that's why I say that he was a Muslim who was working for King Henry VIII. And this is something you would see in central London sometimes as well. Like, you know, changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace, there's another site called Horse Guards Parade, and this is where they have the soldiers on horseback changing over as well. And I'll skip that one at a time. But this one is a Moroccan who came to England. Now, roughly around the year 1600, what do we have? Queen Elizabeth I has been excommunicated from Rome, and she needs to form allies, and she wants to make treaties. So who's the ones who are helping her out now? The Ottomans, as well as the Moroccans. One such Moroccan who came to England in the year 1600 was Abdul Wahid. And look how he's dressed. The Amama. He was over 6 foot tall as well. He had a beard. He had a highly decorative sword. And wherever he went, this is how he used to go around with another 20 odd Moroccans. 2 Moroccans who were non-Muslims as well. And he came to Queen Elizabeth to set up a treaty. Number 1, let's attack Spain together. Because we have a common enemy now, isn't it? Because the Moroccans wanted to retake Spain to make it Muslim again. And something else which they said was that Queen Elizabeth is a Protestant Christian. Protestants largely don't have any idols like the Catholics do. So they said, the Catholics, they're into idol worshipping, but the Protestants are not into idol worship. And that's what we don't do either. So that's another common enemy. Now sometimes, you know, when diplomats go abroad, they talk about the commonalities first. And in this case, that's what happened in here. He also sold sugar over here. And what do you think he was buying from England? Something that hasn't changed even today. What does England export? Weapons. He was buying weapons from England. Something else that was noted at his time, that what the Moroccan ambassador was doing, was that he was doing his own halal chicken. So what do Moroccans love? What's the traditional dish? Not couscous, chicken. Tagine. So maybe he was a bit homesick, so he wanted the tagine. So he was performing his own halal chicken, sacrificing the chicken here. It was also noted that he was facing eastwards, doing his salah as well. And he was here for 6 months. He was the talk of the town. So imagine that. His legacy, believe it or not, lived on. How did it live on? In 1604, there was a very famous playwright called, who's England's most famous playwright? Shakespeare, or Sheikh Zubair, sometimes the Muslims like to call him. But Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, created a character called, who knows some of the characters? Othello. The Moor. We tend to forget the ending part, the Moor. Have a guess who this character is based upon. Abdul Wahid. For those of you who went to school here, did you learn about this part? Who Othello the Moor was based on? Abdul Wahid. We don't. We just largely don't hear about it. There's some academic books, and Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, they do make mention of it as well. Shakespeare was inspired by Abdul Wahid to create Othello the Moor. And this is something we just don't hear about. 6 months is over though, and he goes back to Morocco. There is no treaty. And so that was the early Muslim community that was in Britain as well. Lascar sailors. Now Lascar sailors were people who were employed by the English Navy or the East India Company, and they would be working on the ships, mostly down below, it was all sweaty and hard work as well, manual work, or more manual work, I should say. And they were only paid a third of the English sailors. So if an English sailor was getting £100, the Lascar sailor would be paid £33. Cheap labour, as they say. So imagine that. And within the Lascar sailors, there was a large group of them who were Muslims, who came from Indian subcontinent, Yemen, Somalia, and from around Malaysia as well. And the earliest recorded one we have who came here was of Gujarati origin, and who was on the English ships. He came to England, and the ships would largely stop at port cities. So South Shields, which actually has a large Yemeni community, and that's the reason why they settle there. You've got Hull, obviously you've got the London would be the Docklands. You've got Newport, Swansea, Cardiff, and Liverpool as well. Does anyone know what's most famous Liverpool's known for the Muslims? It was the first mosque in England that we know about. Personally, I don't believe that is the first mosque, but until there's any proof otherwise, I would say it's the first mosque in England that we know. But when the sailors were coming here, the Lascar sailors, how do you think the locals felt about it? There was Islamophobia back then. They didn't like it. What they were saying was that they're stealing our jobs, they're stealing our women. So, you know, what we hear about today is nothing new. When you've got high unemployment, let's blame the other, you know, the dark person, as they say. Stealing our jobs, stealing our women, etc. But it's nothing new. And this is actually from around about 1919. So they had the individuals had set up their own sailor houses, Lascar sailor houses, to accommodate for the sailors that were coming here, and they were being left on the streets. They had to feed for themselves, as they say, as well. Some of them actually wrote letters when they were coming here back in the 1600s, even to the kings at that time. Some of them got a petition together, and they said, it's just too cold over here. Could you please pay for a passage to go back home? This is what happened as well. Some of them, I do admit, they did convert to Christianity because that was the only way they could accept charity, alms, as they say. So it's a bit sad in terms of that, what happened. So this is like Salim Abu Zaid's Lascar sailor's house. And it's a bit more clearer image there. And this is the Yemeni community in Cardiff, an actual picture. So this is around about the 1930s in Cardiff. Another early community that's before the Second World War. And there, some of their descendants do exist. Some of the Yemeni Muslims who were here, they had English Muslim wives as well, or Welsh wives in this case. And they've also got daughters and children, grandchildren as well. (1649) was the first English Quran. It wasn't a direct translation of the Arabic Quran. Which language do you think that it was a translation of? Not Latin? It's French, which was a translation of an Egyptian Arabic Quran. That's what it used to look like. Anyone reads French? Parle français? No one? But that's how the French spell the Quran. Whenever you see the spelling of the Quran with a C or a K in the media, you largely know what's going to follow is going to be what? Islamophobic. Bear that in mind. If you don't believe me, go and do your own research and you'll find it. If it's written with a C or a K, what follows subsequently, it's going to be Islamophobic. And what it was translated by Alexander Ross, who was actually a Scottish cleric of King Charles. And the Prime Minister at that time was Oliver Cromwell. His statue sits outside Parliament. It was a civil war at that time. And what happened was that even Oliver Cromwell wrote letters to the ruler of Algiers requesting for the prisoners to be set free, be given mercy as well. And he was quoting from the Quran. And then some people start wondering, how would he know about passages of the Quran? And that's because during his time we had the first translation of the English Quran, or the Arabic Quran, sorry, a translation of the Quran into the English language. And that was Alexander Ross. He was a Scottish cleric who was living on the Isle of Wight, where the translation took place. I worked it out. It's a private house we were staying at, Bram's Hill in Hampshire. So it was on England, English mainland. And that, believe it or not, that house, Bram's Hill House, became the police college as well for senior officers to have go on their special courses. So you know, sometimes you have Muslims, police officers who exhibit at these Muslim events. Like there was the recent Muslim shopping festival in Excel. They had the cars there and whatever. I thought, well, let me go along. I go, do you know where the Quran was translated? They go, no. I go, in your headquarters, you know, it was where they're doing the training. And it's like, is it? I go, yeah. So Muslims got an early connection even to the police as well, and that shocks them. So Alexander Ross, he translated the Quran to show the rest of England that the Muslims held their leader in high esteem. Unlike what was happening in England at that time, Oliver Cromwell and his supporters wanted to get rid of the king, who was their leader. So he was trying to explain that Muslims are, you know, much more respectful to their leader as opposed to what we are being to our leader. So he's done it in some, think about it, some sympathetic way as well. But you know, even when this Quran was translated, the printer was summoned to like a court, and he was being asked, why are you printing about other people's faiths? So the Quran, the translation of this was actually delayed by a few months. But 1649, we not only had a first translation into English language, the Quran, we also had a printed version as well. But in the Muslim countries, if you had a printed Quran, do you know what the hukum was originally? What do you think the hukum was? Deaf. And it was only in the 1700s when a Hungarian convert kind of like petitioned the Ottoman Sultan, saying that we're falling behind in education levels, as well as the rest of the European countries are publishing their books en masse. The non-Muslims could have printed books in Muslim countries, but the Muslims could not have a printed Quran even in their book, in their language. So imagine that. The printing machine came out 1500s by the Germans, but we were so far behind. Sometimes people have used this as an explanation to say that's why they use the word Muslim world. I don't use that. The Muslims fell behind educationally. But the more you can spread your knowledge by media even, then you're controlling the masses as well and other people. That's Alexander Ross there. And this is chapter 1. This is Surah Al-Fatiha. How it was translated and printed. Moving on. 1652 now. How many of you love coffee? I would normally ask the sisters as well, because they traditionally tend to drink a lot more coffee. But in this case, I'm asking the brothers, do you drink coffee? You do. Which coffee do you like? Ribena. When coffee arrived here, the journey came through that, the coffee bean from Ethiopia crossed over into Yemen, and then what they call modern day Saudi, then went obviously part of the Ottoman Empire to Austria, and even from Istanbul, Constantinople at that time, people started learning about how to produce coffee. And then there was a person who came from Constantinople, Istanbul, who set up at this site, which is in the city of London. I should go to this place on my City of London tour, and there is a plaque that says, "Here stood the first London coffee house at the sign of Pascal Rosie's head, 1652. You know, if you look at pub signs, they normally have a head image on there, and that's what similarly happened to these different coffee houses as well. But what happened was, a number of coffee shops started to emerge, and they were calling it the Mohammedan berry. Berry as in khamr, alcohol, that's what they thought it was. Coffee was banned even in like modern day sales, in Saudi once upon a time for 10 years, pre the Saudi state. And people don't realize that because they saw it as an intoxicant. And what happened was, when you had a number of these coffee shops emerging in the city of London, some would call it Murad Ye Great Coffee Shop. You've also got the Sultaness Coffee Shop. So you can see and you can understand that from these tokens they had, their own currency, tokens, they recognized the drink called what we call coffee today to be associated with the Muslims. There is in that scary tactic that was that if you drank coffee, you would what? If you drank coffee, you would what? Turn Muslim, or turn Turk, as they would say. Something similar happened to me when I told my friend I want to look into Islam. He goes, "What do you want to look into Islam for?" I go, "Well, I just want to read the Quran." He goes, "If you're going to read the Quran, you're going to be turning into one of them as well." But he spoke the truth. He saw that vision, he did, in this case. Similarly, what happened here. People were thinking that if you're going to drink coffee, then you will turn Muslim as well. People even got a petition together to get coffee banned as well from this country. It's taken trade away from the pubs and the inns. So there's a hidden gem, this locality in the city of London. Again, you wouldn't know where it is. It's through some alleyways, etc. Right. Any restaurateurs here? No, they'll be all working today, isn't it? I forgot about that. The first curry house was set up by this person called Sheikh Deen Mohammed. And this is a site that doesn't actually exist because it's been knocked down. And they're going to build new houses there, these high-end houses, etc. And he came from East India, in what we classify as Bengal, and he was working for the East India Company. And he went to Ireland first, where he met another Muslim over there as well, and he married an Irish woman as well. And then they came to settle in central London, and in 1810 they opened up the Hindustani Coffee House. But this was the first location we had of a curry house that was being made by a native Indian. There were some English people who attempted to make curries as well at different sites, but it's a native one, so this is this one. He did have a green plaque there as well, but then the business only lasts for 1 year. Highly entrepreneurial, he doesn't give up. He goes to Brighton now, and he establishes Mohammedan's Bath. There's a modern day picture taken of me. It's at this site, Queen's Hotel. And Brighton has another full history there, which you can have a walking tour there as well. You'll be shocked what you find there in terms of Muslim history. So that's something else, Sheikh Deen Mohammed done. It's said that he's the one who introduced what? What do you think he could have introduced that you could use in your hair? You got some long hair. What do you put in your hair apart from hair gel? Shampoo. He's the one who introduced it to England. He was also King George's shampooist as well. Imagine that. Personal hygiene came by the route of this person. The first Muslim in Parliament. How much time have we got left, sorry? 38. Okay, about 7 minutes, isn't it? Okay. First Muslim in Parliament wasn't an Asian. A lot of people think that. South Asian, Pakistani maybe. Lord Ahmed gets the credit. No, it was actually this person, Lord Stanley. He had a Muslim name called Abdul Rahman. Any Abdul Rahmans in here? No one called Abdul Rahman? He was the first Muslim. He was actually part of the diplomatic service, and he was stationed in Istanbul, and that's where he was exposed to Islam. So that's how he became Muslim. When his father died, he inherited his seat and becomes a lord. He was a peerage lord. Lord as in title, not Rab. And then he takes his seat in Parliament. Sorry, in the House of Lords he does. And at the same time, he inherited his father's manor, his land. And on this land, there were 3 inns, three like pubs. What do you think he did with the pubs? He closed them down. So a bit of early Islamic law creeping in here in the 1800s. He did have 2 wives as well. He knew some Arabic, but he was known as a man who prayed. Which prayer do you think? Which prayer? Tahajjud, yes. He was known as a man who prayed Tahajjud. Imagine that. We've got Ramadan coming up as well. So get into the spirit of things, guys. Even though we should do it outside of Ramadan as well. But he did establish a masjid in North Wales in 1903, but we can't pinpoint it where it is. But that's documented. He did have a masjid in 1903. But what he also did in North West Wales, that he renovated, restored windows, church windows, you know, stainless glass that you find on church windows. He renovated them to Islamically inspired decoration. So imagine that. We have churches in Britain that have Islamically inspired windows. Okay, who are the Urdu speakers here? Who can read it? You can? Okay, fantastic. This one's for you now. Can you read this? Come closer, come closer. Don't be shy. I gave this to a Urdu-speaking reader from Slough, and he struggled to read it. He goes, "This is classical Urdu, this is." Can you read it?
Do you mind if I zoom in on it?
You can do. The top part we have Urdu, and then we've got in transliteration as well as the English meaning underneath. Normally, people can read those first few letters there. How do you say today in Urdu? Yeah, that's what the first word is. Can you see it? Now, maybe? Well, who do you think could have written this, though, in the 1800s? How do you find the Urdu script here? Paka? High class? A bit difficult to read as well? Yeah. Who do you think wrote this in the 1800s? They weren't Muslim? They were somebody of status? Who could have written this? This high class Urdu? Who's that? Queen Victoria. So around the corner, in your ends, as they say, you had a resident who could speak and write fluent Urdu. And she used to have lessons every day for 1 hour, and they're compiled in the Hindustani diaries in Windsor Castle. How many of you been to Windsor Castle? Some of you. Whole different tour can be done there. And not everything's on display. They have the Kaaba cloth there as well. I've seen it as well. But that was because of Hafiz Abdul Kareem, who was sent over here as a servant initially for the Queen Jubilee's anniversary. And then within 1 year, he's been elevated to her personal tutor. And have a guess what Queen Victoria's famous dish was now? Huh? curry, chicken salan. Every Sunday it'd be listed on her menu. I've got a copy of the menu upstairs as well. And that was a choice she could have, but she was a great fan of chicken curry. So he was near, rumors are he may have converted her or whatever, but he was somebody, he was the last person to see Queen Victoria before the lid of the coffin was placed on her coffin. So imagine that. That's how close relationship they had. And even the royal family and the royal servants hated him because he was seen as a lower class foreigner and he had got so close to Queen Victoria. So imagine that. So much so that the head female of the household staff went to Queen Victoria while she's at her dressing table, and then Queen Victoria, you know what? Defended him. She used a few swear words as well. Was sort of called you racist, you classist person. How dare you speak about my Abdul Kareem like that? There's a film that's online you can watch called Victoria and Abdul, if you want to learn more about this. But what happened to him afterwards was quite shocking. As soon as Queen Victoria died, he was shipped back to India. Okay, Abdul Wahid now. He gave some books as well to Queen Victoria. And rumour has it, Queen Victoria asked for some more copies about a book called Faith in Islam. She gave it to her children. And he opened up England's first mosque in 1889. There was a prayer room 2 years before that. And now the Muslims have the building again for the last 20 years. And they're trying to restore the building. And they've made it into part of a museum as well. And this shows us a picture of the attendees who were there. And in this picture, there's some of them making dua as well, Abdul Wahid at the front. But you can see it's a multiracial congregation as well. But he did actually die in London. A lot of people think he died in Liverpool. But he died in London, he did. And I worked out his London locations. Okay, got 45. This is Woking Mosque as well, opened up by somebody who was born Jewish, whose parents mother converted to Christian Protestantism, and married a former Jewish person who became a Christian Protestant Christian. And he was sent from Hungary to Istanbul or Constantinople, and he was he was sent to the madrasas there. Imagine that. And there was this big conversation I've had with various people. Could he have been a non-Muslim and gone to the madrasa? I would narrow it down to 2 madrasas in Turkey, and I visited them on one of my last visits, and nobody could tell me the truth of what the clear-cut said. And I went to a Jewish museum as well and asked them, could a Jew go into a madrasa in Turkey? They said no. He's had to have been Muslim in order to go into a madrasa. And obviously from the Turkish Muslim side, they said there's no way he could be a Jew to go to a madrasa. He had to be a Muslim. So what we say is that, inshallah, he was upon Islam. And some of his speeches, well, if you were to read them, they seem pro-Islam as well. But he died and buried in Brookwood Cemetery, which is one of the earliest Muslim cemeteries in Britain. Okay, so to speed up. The site of London's first public Eid prayer, this is something I discovered a few years back, and within that same year I managed to get a blue plaque on it. If you know where Chingford is, on top of Waltham Forest in London, that's the site of where those London's first Eid prayers took place. That's us there with the mayor, councillors, council of mosques, and key people. Took some pictures. Believe it or not, my second plaque now is going to be in Walthamstow, East London, on Wednesday the 8th of March. Anyone know what's so special about that date? This Wednesday, it's International Women's Day. This has been 4 years in the making. It's going to be to Fatima Qasmi, and she wears a niqab as well, and that's something that's going to be there, and there's going to be a lot of media down that day. We also had the Begum of Bhopal who came. Again, I'm not too sure if this is going to work, but you know, a lot of people sometimes say the niqab is a modern day political statement, blah, blah, blah. It's not here, no. Is it here? Oh no, it's a clip of Abdul Wahid. Nope, it's not there. You know, people say the niqab is a modern day political statement, but people don't talk about niqab in the past. How, even 1,000 years ago, from 1,000 years ago, how the bridal veil has played a part in British custom. No part of the conversation. They in fact borrowed it from the Muslims though, the Crusaders, when they went over and butchered people, but they brought some of the Muslim practices back, of which one of them was that bridal veil. Even confetti was a practice that they brought over from observing the Muslims as well. There were castle designs that came from the Muslims as well, the Crusaders brought back as well. And we have a replica of Saladin Ayyubi's castle in England. It's called Beeston Castle. This is the picture of London's first Imam who opened up London's first mosque in 1895. It used to be in Camden Town. He relocated it to Euston Road. That's the red door there. We do take a sightseeing tour buses down here. We stop outside. And I give the live commentary here, and the neighbours come out from the balconies. They think, what's this bus doing here? Who's that guy with the red fez hat? And they start listening to the commentary as well, so it benefits them as well. But the chap who actually owns this house, it was a house mosque, it looks identical to this him as well. I was shocked when he opened the door. And I had to show him the picture, and he obviously laughed as well. But this is the site of London's first mosque, 1895, that we know of. And I did manage to find his grave as well, in New Wilson Cemetery, and we just gave a small befitting headstone to give us a recognition to the pioneer. And a woman now, Lady Kobold, Evelyn Kobold. She was the first woman, a British woman, to perform Hajj in 1933. And, she used to live down Mayfair, 100 years ago in Mayfair, fashionable, high-end, and she used to live there, but she performed Hajj. She always said, even to the Pope, she was always Muslim, but didn't actually make it public. She was, as a child, her parents also been well off, and they travelled around Muslim countries, Cairo and some other North African countries as well. And she had Muslim nannies as well, and that's where she got her exposure to Islam. She did write a book called Pilgrimage to Mecca, and tomorrow morning, believe it or not, I have my first Muslim women's tour. That on this tour, I only look at Muslim females. Most of my tours, at no fault of my own, and I recognize I don't have much female content on it. And I did set out, say, no, I've got to, make a Muslim female tour that features only Muslim women. So sorry, brothers, in this case, I can't feature you guys. So that's what's going to take place tomorrow. Okay, Malcolm X. How many of you knew he came to England? How many visits did he have? He had 4 visits. What he was doing in America, he was doing in UK. But hardly anyone speaks about this. And one of a handful of people who has looked at Malcolm X's journeys around England. Okay, I don't know what's happening with these connections. No. Yeah, there is Wi-Fi, yeah. Oh, hold on. We did disconnect it, isn't it? I think that might be the reason why it's not. No, it is, yeah. Yeah, it is there, but it's not playing. Okay, what I would suggest, if you want to see some of these clips, like the Malcolm X one, just go to Sheikh Google, or YouTube, and type in Malcolm X in Smithwick. And that's the place he visited 9 days before he was killed. And there's a plaque there as well. As a community, we lack on plaques. We don't care about plaques. We don't care about celebrating our heritage in Britain. We don't care about nominating people who did well to the community, which is quite odd. But that sister, I went to different Muslim sites and mosques, and not a single one of them was interested in having that plaque on their building. And they were saying, well, politics will get in the way. I go, what's that? He goes, well, if you give her a plaque, then other people are going to moan and say, well, why haven't you given this person a plaque? And I'm saying, well, why don't you nominate them then? You can have more than one Muslim in the place as well, different places. But we only have about 15 plaques in the whole of the UK. In terms of representation, that's appalling. Malcolm X has a plaque, but it was not given by the Muslims. Upstairs I will show you another Muslim who was given a plaque, who was a black Muslim, but again, it wasn't the Muslims who gave it. So, I've had to speed up a lot more as well, but I said this is only a brief look, by the way. Ask yourself now, from what you've learnt, from the different people who are mentioned, who could you relate to? Which person could you wish to look into more about? I was a non-Muslim when I actually researched Malcolm X. 2 months before I became Muslim, I went to the cinema and I watched that film, Malcolm X, done by Spike Lee. And that was the only film I went by myself ever to a cinema. And in some ways that did actually push me to go towards more Islam as well. Do you believe there should be more plaques in Britain for Muslims as well as Muslim events?
Yes.
How many do you have in Slough? Why? Where's the first masjid in Slough? Stock Produce. Where was the first Jummah prayers? Jummah prayers normally come before the masjid. Where was the first Jummah prayers? On your website for this masjid, sorry trustees, just to mention this, does it make mention about the history of the mosque? Does it make mention of where the Jummah prayers were held before this mosque was established? Okay. What site was it? In this mosque? It used to be a church. Before it was in the car park. Bus station car park. Is there a plaque there to recognize that monument event that took place there? The site exists. What's on the site now? Tesco's. Where the big Tesco is. Why can't you get the plaque onto the Tesco then?
The issue is it gets concealed. The reason it gets concealed, one of the reasons it gets concealed, they don't want it to be put to the fore. That's what I believe.
In my experience, it's the other way around. Muslims don't actually want it. They don't think about it in terms of that public representation of Islam. I speak about Islam in settings you would never imagine where Islam could be presented. I do not hold my words back because I contextualize my speech. There are certain topics that Islamic speakers won't speak about, but they know I would. It's not prevent, refer or anything like that. It's to do with the topics I'm discussing. For example, it could be the pirates. The pirates themselves, you know, the pirates, normally the pirates of the Caribbean or Somalia, that's how people remember the pirates. I was taught about them in school. In reality, who were they? Non-Muslim academics have said what we call the pirates were in reality the Mujahideen from North Africa who wanted to take back Muslim Spain. You might have heard of Blackbeard. He was actually a European Muslim, a Redbeard as well. There was in a Dutch pirate as well, a privateer. Dutch pirate called Jan Johnson when he was in Morocco. He actually converted to Islam. He was called Morat Rais. He had a son with a Moroccan woman, and that son then went on to America. He was one of the first Muslims around Brooklyn. And his deed does exist in the Brooklyn archives as well. And he was called Anthony Saley. Saley being the part of where in Morocco became Saleh, sometimes they pronounce it. So think of it as a step forward. How can you present Islam publicly? One of the ways is having that plaque. One of the ways I say is come out of the classrooms and do outdoor learning. You'd be surprised how many non-Muslims actually enjoy coming on tours like this. They want to know more about Islam. You know, I have a lot of readers. I organize events like Eid cruises, Sisters Afternoon Tea Cruise next week, and the sisters who do it, who are readers, they say, you know, your events, we like to bring our non-Muslim friends, our non-Muslim family members, because they find it as neutral ground. It's not a masjid, but what we talk about is about the Muslims as well. Public representation of Islam in the public realm is highly important in terms of leaving that legacy there, in terms of our history. And I don't mean just put the dawah table out there once a week. I mean get some permanent recognition for these sites. Even where that Tesco is, you're saying that's where the first Eid prayers took place, whatever year that was. I don't see why not. It might be a long process, but you've got to be, you know, adamant to get it up, to get that plaque onto the building. It's history of Slough. Work with your local archives. You know, Black and Asian people traditionally do not go to local archives, let alone museums, which is what's represented there. I've done, as mentioned in the intro, I was commissioned to do the first Islamic tour of the Tate Britain. And I was looking at paintings, and I was saying something else in terms of what was there. And as I say, the English staff members, they were saying I was the first person who gave an Eastern interpretation of what was there. And what was there was like an infrared image of a woman with a headscarf that they said that she was sitting down and she was taking water out the well to put into the water beaker. I said, no. And I went down on the floor in front of the painting, exactly like this, and I did this position, which is the Salah position, or part of the Salah positions, you know? And you know what they said? We can see that now. And they said, Abdul Wahid, you're the first person to tell us about this. So sometimes we need to, engage with these people in order to give the different take to what we normally see. Any questions? It's a bit 9 o'clock now. I can go on and on. You do all-nighter as well if you want to. Any questions, sir? Why do I wear the Ottoman fez? 2 reasons. Number one, when I became a tour guide, I wanted to be identified as a Muslim tour guide. Tour guides sometimes dress up like as a character role. And I thought about perhaps wearing like the Moorish type of outfit. And I thought it might be a bit too flamboyant, and would I go on the tube like that? And I thought, no, I wouldn't do that. But then I thought, yeah, if I wear this, because this was the headdress of the Victorian Muslims in Britain. Like we saw Haji Muhammad Doli, Abdul Wahid would wear one, and that's what the Victorian male Muslim community would wear, as well as other Muslims from around the world as well. And this acts as a marker if I'm in a crowd. So if I've got a group of people, or individuals or family, when I was doing tour guiding, they can see me, I stand out like this. So it's 2 reasons. Turban can be done.
Does the copy of the first translation still exist? And have anyone done that?
It's online. You can just type in Alexander Ross Quran online. I think it's the University of Massachusetts that have it online.
So you know the Quran that they found in Birmingham University?
Yeah.
Was that here or was that?
No, that was brought over here. The staff at Birmingham University knew about it prior to going public by a few years. But obviously they made it public afterwards. But that's only fragments or pages of the Quran. And there's another part in France as well. But that's probably the earliest you have. Even, I did a tour at Eton College as well. They've got Quran there from the 10th century. Didn't know that, did you? 10th century, up the road. In your ends.
But I'm assuming most people wouldn't have access to that, isn't it?
I can do a tour there. It's open to the public as well if you want to have a read it, etc. as well. People think it's not accessible. But there's a set process. Obviously, if you want to take a look at the Quran, you can't just walk in and look at the Quran. You have to pre-book and etc. as well, and then take identification. If you want to know more about Windsor Muslim history, if you go to the Windsor Muslim Association, I've written an article on there as well, which can look at some of the local Muslim connections. And they go back to 1600s or so.
I think the brother at the front here has a question. Brother?
Yeah, I was saying one of the oldest
Yeah.
was anyone before him that did like direct translation?
Can you just repeat the question so the sisters can hear it upstairs?
The question was, the Marmaduke Pictorial Quran was the earliest Quran that was translated from Arabic into the English language. You had George Sell had his Quran as well, but you had somebody called Ayub Suleiman Dayello, who was he was put into slavery. He was in the 1700s. He ended up going to America, working on the plantations. Eventually, he won his freedom, came to England, and he was at service to Sir Hans Sloane. You know, Monopoly board, you get Sloane Square. And Sir Hans Sloane is seen as one of the founding fathers of the British Museum. So he was translating books from Arabic into English. But when he was here, he wrote 3 Qurans from scratch, from memory. So you've got that in terms of the Arabic Quran as well. In terms of the English one, Marmaduke Pickthall may just be the first one from the straight Arabic to the English, but there were versions before then. There was also a Latin version. That was the first European one, done in around about the 1300s. And that was done by somebody who was from Lincolnshire. But that was Arabic to Latin.
An absolutely astonishing amount of knowledge from the brother. It's amazing how much he's managed to cramp into his brain. So well done, brothers. And thank you very much for that. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here. Can I have a round of applause for the brother, please? Thank you very much.
Something I've suggested, maybe you could run the sightseeing tour bus from here as well. So take a look at the Muslim heritage sites and do pick up and drop off from the Masjid as well.
That's great.
So
yeah,
that's
thank
something
you.
else.
Yeah.
You don't need to go into London. I think about the additional cost as well. Door-to-door service, as they say.
Very good. Okay. I would like to give the sisters an opportunity to ask any questions. If there are any sisters upstairs with any questions, any of the youngsters who have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. So here's a question for the youngsters. Do you think that perhaps maybe we should have some of the history in the classes in schools that obviously you don't have any history of what you've seen today in the schools? Perhaps maybe that should be, something we should be looking at. So, something for us to learn. So I'd like to remind you that there is a very nice exhibition upstairs. Feel free to go upstairs and have a look at some stuff, and there's some refreshments, so you're welcome to have it. Thank you very much once again. It's been an absolute pleasure. Jazakallah khair. I'll just finish with a very short dua. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil mursaleen, Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanatan wa fil akhirati hasanatan wa qina azaban nar. Rabbana wa la tahmil alaina isran qabla allazina min qablin. ربنا ولا تهنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. جزاك الله خير. Upstairs on the left side, if you want to see the exhibition in the library area upstairs.
Yeah, upstairs you will find proof of a Somali community 100 years ago, the Algerian community who existed as well, and you'll also see some Islamically inspired buildings that used to exist in the past as well.